Hey guys, Adam Andrews with Aeroworks Productions and HardcoreDrones.com. Today we were shooting a video to talk about some of the myths and misconceptions about filing, getting your Section 333, how it works, what you can and can't do, what you need to have, and so on. We're going to briefly talk about the hobbyist side versus the professional side and some of the common questions that we see and mistruths being spread on social media and such. So let's briefly touch on the hobbyist side. So up until just a few months ago, hobbyists really only had one thing to go by, and that was what was called AC 9157. It came out in the 80s from the FAA, and AC in FAA terms stands for an advisory circular. So it's an advisory. It's something like, hey, you might want to know this. And basically all it stated at the time was, you know, we understand that there's model aircraft. There's been model aircraft for 60, 70, 80 years flying around. We've had manned aircraft as well. But we realize that we need to have a little bit of knowledge about where they're at and when they're flying. So let's follow these main guidelines. Don't fly above 400 feet because traditionally and typically manned aircraft aren't supposed to be below 500 feet. So you get a 100-foot buffer there unless they're landing or taking off. And there's obviously some other cases like medevac helicopters and things like that. But don't fly above 400 feet. Don't fly over a crowd of people. You know, don't fly over a school or a church playground because if something happens, obviously you could injure somebody. And the last thing is basically don't fly within 5 miles of an airport. You know, stay out of the airport's airspace. If you are within the airspace, and actually the original 9157 didn't give that, it just said don't fly in an airport's airspace. But if you do, let them know about it. Now, a lot of people don't realize that all across the United States, and we're specifically talking about the U.S. only here because that's what the 333 applies to. All across the U.S., there's many, many RC clubs and fields and airstrips on airports' grounds, essentially. So they're within that 5-mile, 3-mile airspace. But they've known about it. They were planned out. The airport, you know, routes traffic accordingly, and they stay away. Everybody's in their own space. Everything's fine. Well, recently, obviously, with the rise of the drone, they have now changed 9157 to 9157A as an alpha. It is still an advisory circular, but they changed a couple things. So yes, they kept in the 400-foot, recommended don't fly above altitude. Don't fly over people. They threw in the new has to be below 55 pounds, so obviously they don't want you flying a huge, heavy-duty fixed-wing airplane or something that's over what, the common hobbyist grade stuff is. But they also added in now the airspace part of things. So what they actually state in there is don't fly within 5 miles of an airport without prior notice. Prior notice. That doesn't mean, hey, I'm going to take off and then I'm going to call the tower and tell them that I'm flying. No. Prior notice means you call the airport or the airspace that you're going to be operating in and say, I'm a hobbyist, I'm flying my Phantom, and I'm going to be taking pictures of my house, and I'm 4 miles away from the airport. Any issues with that? Usually they're like, okay, whatever, and you go on about your business. Now they do also state a line in there that says, if you, let's say, operate normally within that 5-mile range, let's say you live 3 miles from the airport and you're going to be flying every day out in your yard, they recommend, again, it's an advisory, it's a recommendation, it's not the law, that you set up some type of a agreement with the airport. At least that, they call this LOA or letter of agreement or letter of authorization when it comes to commercial operations. This is an agreement that the tower knows you, they've got your phone number, you've exchanged some information. They know that you fly every, Wednesday at this particular park and you're only flying up to 100 feet. It's not an issue. They know who you are. If anything, it helps you out because if somebody reports you to the police or something, or calls the tower or somehow they get a hold of the tower, they're going to say, there's some guy flying a drone around the parking lot over here by my house and, I want the cops called. Well, they can say, well, no, we understand. We know who he is. He's actually contacted us. So all it can do is help you. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So let's sum that up again. 400 feet, don't fly over people. If you fly within an airport's airspace, contact them. If you live within an airport's airspace, maybe set up some type of an agreement with them that says, hey, I live 3 miles away. Here's my number. If you have any issues, call me. I never fly above 200 feet or 100 feet, and that's it. You're done. Hobbyist side, all done. Where all the questions seem to be stemming from now on the forums and a lot of the miscommunication and misinformation is about the 333 exemption. Okay, now Aeroworks, my company, Aeroworks Productions, we are a 333 exempted company. We have a FAA exemption. We are operated by FAA pilots. We have a blanket COA, which is what's now issued with all Section 333 exemptions. You essentially get a blanket COA to operate anywhere in the United States as long as you're below 200 feet. You don't fly within 5 miles of a towered airport and 3 miles of an uncontrolled airport. Now, for the most part, that gives you a lot of leeway where you can fly. Now, for me, I live in a town where I'm pretty much within 5 mile radius of an airport. So I had to apply for an additional COA, or Certificate of Authorization, to fly within that airspace. And we have several of those COAs in place around the United States. So just a little bit of background on who we are and where we're coming from about this experience and talking to you about the 333. So the biggest question that I see on the forums is, do I need to be a pilot to operate my drone commercially under the Section 333 exemption? And the answer is yes. Now, they did loosen those requirements up a little bit. You can be a sport pilot, which does require less time, or a recreational pilot, and then they kind of go up from there. You do have to have a pilot's license, an FAA pilot's license, to operate a drone in the United States commercially. Now, a lot of people are going to argue about that. They're going to say, why do I need to have a pilot's license to fly a Phantom? First of all, one big misconception about that. It has nothing to do with you piloting the drone. We know for a fact that there are thousands and thousands of qualified RC pilots that can fly model aircraft way better than a licensed pilot that has had no experience in RC. That's just the case. Unfortunately, what the RC side doesn't have, the majority of them, is the knowledge of things like airspace, TFRs, NOTAMs, weather, communications, the things that you learn when you go to pilot school, that you learn in ground school as well as when you start flying in the airspace. Yeah, could we learn that in the ground school? Sure we could. I'm sure there's going to be courses coming out online soon, UAV ground school. Another misconception, there is no certification currently there's a lot of people putting out videos in schools and classes that say, take our class and this and that. Nobody has an FAA certified course that will make you legal to fly your drone. There's a lot of good courses out there. There's a lot of good instruction on videography and photography and how to work on drones and how to fly drones and all that. We have a lot of them ourselves. But nobody out there can certify and say, this is a certified course, and if you take my course, we're going to give you a little plaque and it's going to say I can fly my drone. That doesn't exist yet. And we're probably looking at 2018 before the UAV pilot certificate comes around, which will be in lieu of having to get a pilot's license, which will be great. But we're probably 2 years out from there. So you've got two things. Fly as a hobbyist, don't charge anybody for your work. Fly commercially and charge people for your work. Now, what a lot of people say is, the FAA, they don't have a leg to stand on. They've never prosecuted one person, blah, blah, blah. Maybe that's the case. We know the Perker case. He was initially fined $10,000. They went back and forth. He won a case. They won a case. They overruled. He settled out of court. We know there's a case in Chicago right now. They were fined $1,900,000 or something like that for operating in some of the busiest airspace in New York and Chicago. Do you want to be the guy that has to lawyer up and have to go out and get a lawyer to fight the FAA? I mean, they're like the IRS basically. Not something I want to do. So you can argue all you want in the forums about it, but the way that it is right now, hobbyist is hobbyist, commercial side is commercial side. So let's talk about some of the other things that go along with the Section 333. So first, you have to file an exemption. You're asking to be exempt from rules and regulations that really only apply to full-size aircraft. Things that are just not possible on a small RC or on a drone. The next thing you have to do, you have to have a registered aircraft. Now, you don't have to have a registered aircraft or a pilot's license even to file for an exemption. The exemption process used to take about 60 days when they were on the peak of their processing. Now they're getting bogged down again. Ours took about 5 months to get. And that's because if they throw one little question out to you or they need a little clarification, guess what? That 60-day process starts all over again. So it's not a quick process. Now there's a lot of ways you can file an exemption. You can do it yourself. We have a video, it costs $9.99, links down in the description on how to file it yourself. We've had a lot of people actually file and get their exemptions from watching our video. There's a whole crop of people that are popping up online. A lot of the drone stores are saying that they'll offer this service as well. We do offer the service, but we're also an exempted company, so we know what we're talking about. But you can file it yourself, and our video will go through the whole process. I'm not going to go through that now. But back to the initial thing that we were talking about, you don't need to have a registered aircraft and you don't need a pilot to file the exemption. You can file an exemption and get an exemption granted without a pilot and without an aircraft. You don't even have to have a drone for that matter. You do have to, however, list the drone make and model in your exemption. So one thing that I would recommend, and this is a free tip I'm going to give you right now, is whether you own a drone or don't own a drone, list every drone that you think you might buy in the exemption, because if it's not listed in there when you get it granted, you're going to have to go through the whole process again to get that amended to add the new drone. So for instance, if you apply and you say, I have a Phantom 3 Professional, and 5 months from now the Phantom 4 comes out and you decide to buy the Phantom 4, or you crash your Phantom 3 and you want to buy the latest model, you're not going to be able to fly it because you have listed the Phantom 3 on there. So I would recommend you list, I have a Phantom 3, I have a Phantom 2, I have an Inspire 1, I have a 3DR Solo, I have a Unique Q5, list them all on there. And in fact, there was even one company that listed A to Z, every drone manufacturer, make and model, and they even made up a few models on the entire gamma, and they were actually granted an exemption. So I thought it was crazy at first until we started running into those issues. I don't know if I would list every single one, but list all of the ones that you think you might operate or that you can afford. Some of the ones on the list were $200,000, $300,000 drones that nobody in the hobbyist or even commercial world is most likely going to buy. So you get your exemption. Okay, we've got our exemption today. It says Aeroworks production is granted a 333 exemption. You can now operate in the national airspace below 200 feet, and it gives you a whole list of things. One of those being a pilot's license. You must be operated by a pilot. Now, you don't have to be the pilot. You can hire a pilot. We get hired all the time by other companies that have exemptions, large construction companies that applied for an exemption, even have their own aircraft, but they need qualified pilots. You have to be current in your aircraft. You have to be a pilot. You have to have a current medical. Now, if you're down in the recreational or sport pilot, you can get away with a driver's license for your medical, but private pilot and above, you do need an actual FAA medical. But you will need to have a pilot. The other thing you're going to need to have is registration. So just like a full-size aircraft, you're going to have a tail number on your aircraft for all of your aircraft. So you're going to apply for that. We go through that in our video. You're going to get an aircraft registration, just like a 747. And it's going to say this aircraft is owned by such and such. It's this make and model and all the rest of the stuff. So you have to have your aircraft registered. You have to have a pilot on staff. And you have to have a 333. Now keep in mind, with the limitations of a 333, those being outside of towered airspace and outside of non-towered airspace, if you pull up any of the new no-fly zone maps, you're going to see there's a lot of airports around the country. And it's not just JFK and Chicago O'Hare and LAX. There's all kinds of little private strips and helipads and helipads on top of hospitals. Those all count as airports. And so if you're within 3 miles of any of those, technically with a 333, you can operate legally. So how do you operate legally? Well, you have to go and file a new COA, and that's done through the civil COA process. And we'll go into that in another video. But for each area that you want to fly or that's affected by some type of airspace, you have to go out and file for a new COA. So for instance, I live in a town where there's a Class D airport. Typically a Class D airport only spans out 4 miles, but the FAA in the drone language talks about a 5-mile radius. So I had to apply for a COA to operate between the center of the airport and 5 miles because my blanket COA covers me outside of the 5 miles. And it was actually granted, but they actually left a little 1-mile donut right around the airport. So I have from 1 mile to 5 mile COA, and then I have the blanket COA outside that. And we've had to do that all around the country where we want to fly. So again, the bullet points and the misconceptions are, yes, you have to have a pilot's license. Yes, you have to have a registered aircraft. That means a tail number. This has nothing to do with the recent registration that they came out with a couple, 3-4 weeks ago. That's a totally different kind of registration. This is actual aircraft registration with a tail number. If every drone that's going to be sold this Christmas put a tail number on it, we would not have any more tail numbers available in the U.S. It's kind of like running out of 3-letter website domains. They're all gone. You can't get any combination of AAA, ABC. They're all gone. And it's the same thing with tail numbers. So whatever registration program they're going to come out with is not going to have to do with N numbers. It's probably going to be a postcard that you write your information in and mail in, or have to pay a fine or fee. But let's talk a little bit about, we talked about hobbyists and what you have to do to operate. So really fly wherever you want. If you're within an airport's airspace, give them a call, let them know before you fly, and so on. But you can't legally charge for it. Now, a lot of people say, well, geez, that sounds like a lot of work to go to the commercial side. I'm just going to fly my drone and take pictures, and no, they're not going to catch me. Whoop-de-doo, Sure, that may be the case. You might be able to film your neighbor's mom's house for a couple $100 here or there. But I can tell you from experience, as a commercial operator, you are not going to work for any kind of a large corporation, a Fortune 500 company, a major production house, unless you have not only a Section 333, but an insurance policy. We have $1 million line of insurance, liability insurance. You're going to have your aircraft insured, most likely. You're going to have the registration. You have to get things like a VHF radio to talk to towers when you're in the airspace. There's a lot of other things that go along with the commercial operation, but I can tell you that companies that want this kind of service appreciate the professionalism and the quality that we can provide and the knowledge that we have of the FAA regulations, the airspace, safety, and everything that goes with it. Now again, I don't necessarily think that everybody needs to be a pilot to operate a drone. But there definitely needs to be some training, because we got a lot of yahoos out there that are just blasting off without reading anything. They're not even calibrating their aircraft. And we've talked about that in other videos, how these things get kicked all around. These have very sophisticated computers inside of them. And they need to be calibrated from time to time, both the IMU and the compass. So those are just the basics. But we have to do pre-flight checks. We have to check systems out. We have to clear the area. We have to set up a landing zone. We have to call, and typically we have to file what's called a NOTAM, which is a notice to airmen. And that essentially gets filed in the FAA's system, and it lets any pilot of a helicopter to a 747 jet flying in your area know that there's going to be UAS operations at a certain time period, at a certain altitude, on a certain date. Typically, we have to file this minimum 24, maximum 48 hours ahead of the time that we're going to even do the work. So in my case, for a couple of the airports that we work in, we have to file a NOTAM 48 hours in advance. We have to call the tower 24 hours in advance. We have to call the tower an hour before we take off. And then we have to be in radio contact the whole time that we're flying, just like if we were flying a jumbo jet. So there's a lot that goes into that. And again, VHF radio, this isn't something that you just go down at Best Buy and buy and your kid starts talking on. This is air safety that we're talking about. You got to have a little knowledge of how to communicate on the radio, when to talk, when not to talk, how to listen for other aircraft. And that's not something you learn at the Best Buy UAV drone school. This is something that you learn in pilot training, full-size aircraft. So I wanted to cover some of those misconceptions. Again, we have a full how to do it yourself Section 333 video down in the description. It's $9.99. It's probably the cheapest, best advice you're going to get out there. We've seen people charging $5,000, $2,000, hundreds of dollars for the information that we give in there. And again, this is coming from a pilot and an RC pilot of 25 years with experience operating a commercial UAS and UAV business. Now, if you want more information, please leave a comment, email me, or check out our two websites. We've got aeroworksproductions.com. That's our commercial aerial imaging company. And our store site where we actually build and sell UAVs and other systems is hardcoredrones.com. And that was formerly blackopsdrones.com for some of my former customers. We cleaned up the site. We got rid of a lot of waste of time products. We put top-notch products that we use and that we recommend. So check that out, hardcoredrones.com. and Aeroworksproductions.com. So thanks again, guys, for listening today. A little bit of a rant today, but I wanted to clear some things up that I've been reading and seeing on the forums. If you got a comment, a question, again, please email me or leave a comment below, and we'll see you next time. We also do have a full line of training videos that we're right now actually producing as we speak. We have, starting with the Phantom, working all the way up to doing full-on commercial operations on how to file a NOTAM, how to talk on the radio, the whole deal. So it's going to take you from a new beginning pilot that just bought a quadcopter to that first flight, to advanced flight, all the way up to advanced operations. And those should be coming out little by little over the next couple weeks and months. And it's going to be great reading and viewing as the weather gets bad out in our area. You know, we're out in the Midwest where we'll have snow here pretty soon. If you're out in the West, hey, great. Enjoy that sunny weather. We wish we had some here too. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you later. Again, Adam with Aeroworks, and blue skies and fly safe.